At 3:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Prime Minister Mark Carney ended what many had described as the final realistic opportunity to repair the unraveling relationship between Canada and the United States. After 47 minutes on a secure video call with President Donald Trump and senior White House officials, Carney disconnected mid-negotiation and, according to multiple sources briefed on both sides, closed the door on further talks. It was not a dramatic shouting match. It was not a chaotic breakdown. It was colder than that. It was a calculated walk away. The call had been scheduled for 2:30 p.m. after days of quiet diplomatic feelers. Both governments understood that markets were unstable, alliances were strained, and the clock was ticking toward deeper structural separation. Publicly, both sides had maintained hardened rhetoric. Privately, there was hope that a leader-to-leader conversation might create an off-ramp. Instead, it created a fracture that may not heal for years. Participants on the American side included President Trump, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, and several senior White House aides. On the Canadian side were Prime Minister Carney, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, Foreign Minister Melanie Joly, and Defense Minister Bill Blair. According to sources familiar with the discussion, President Trump opened the call in a conciliatory tone. He reportedly said both countries needed to stop the escalation and get back to normal. He framed himself as ready to make a deal. Then he outlined what he described as a fair compromise. The United States, he said, would immediately remove all tariffs on Canadian goods. It would publicly reaffirm commitment to NORAD and continental defense. It would restore full intelligence cooperation through Five Eyes. It would issue a formal statement recognizing Canadian sovereignty and territorial integrity. On the surface, that sounded like exactly what Canada had been demanding for weeks. But then came the conditions. First, Canada would reverse the financial restrictions it had imposed on United States banks and formally commit not to introduce similar restrictions in the future. Second, Canada would sign a 10-year guaranteed energy export agreement, locking in minimum supply levels to the United States at market prices without interruption. Third, Canada would withdraw from the Alternative Security Partnership Fund approved by NATO and commit to working exclusively through traditional NATO command structures, where the United States retains dominant influence. Trump reportedly characterized these as reasonable assurances that Canada would not weaponize economic or security policy against Washington in the future. Sources say Carney did not interrupt. He took notes. He listened. When Trump finished, Carney asked one question. Were these terms open to negotiation, or were they non-negotiable? Trump's reported response was blunt. Take it or leave it. And if Canada left it, consequences would follow. That is when the tone shifted. Carney spoke for approximately 3 minutes. Those present described his response as controlled but unequivocal. He told the president that Canada had spent the last month building alternative partnerships, restructuring its energy diplomacy, and strengthening financial defenses precisely because Washington had demonstrated unpredictability. He reportedly said that asking Canada to dismantle those tools in exchange for promises already broken in recent weeks was not compromise. It was surrender. Then he ended the call. Canada will not surrender. This call is over. And the screen went dark. For several seconds, there was silence in the Situation Room. President Trump reportedly stared at the blank screen before asking if the call had dropped. He was informed that Carney had intentionally ended it. Sources say Trump asked if they could reconnect immediately. The National Security Advisor advised against it, explaining that forcing reconnection would escalate the diplomatic breach. Trump reportedly reacted with visible frustration. He asked what options remained. Could the United States cut off trade? Could it escalate tariffs? Could it impose new sanctions? The answers were constrained. Unilaterally severing trade with Canada would require congressional involvement and would devastate critical American sectors. Energy retaliation was limited because the United States depends on Canadian crude and electricity in multiple regions. Financial escalation risked market collapse. According to officials present, the realization set in quickly. Leverage had shifted. At 4:47 p.m., Just 90 minutes after ending the call, Carney stepped before reporters in Ottawa. The press conference lasted under 6 minutes. He confirmed that he had concluded negotiations were not possible with the current United States administration. He stated that Washington was not seeking compromise, but capitulation. Canada would not capitulate. He then announced that Canada was suspending all negotiations indefinitely. From this point forward, Canada would proceed with independent security development through NATO-backed mechanisms. It would accelerate diversification of energy exports away from United States dependence. It would strengthen financial safeguards against external volatility. It would deepen partnerships in Europe, Asia, and across the Commonwealth. When the United States is ready to engage as an equal, Carney said, Canada will talk. Until then, Canada moves forward. He took no questions. The message was unmistakable. This was not brinkmanship. It was separation. Diplomatic crises happen frequently. Leaders posture, negotiations stall, talks collapse and resume. This moment feels different for 3 reasons. First, both sides came to the call believing they were offering concessions. The United States thought lifting tariffs and reaffirming NORAD was generous. Canada viewed those as baseline corrections for actions Washington should never have taken. Second, the structural alternatives Canada has built are real. Energy negotiations with Asian and European buyers are reportedly advanced. NATO's Alternative Security Partnership Fund is operational. Financial regulations have already been enacted. Third, domestic political incentives on both sides reward firmness, not retreat. Carney has consolidated national unity around sovereignty. Trump has framed the dispute as defending American interests from foreign pressure. Neither leader can easily pivot without political cost. Financial markets responded within minutes of Carney's press conference. The Canadian dollar strengthened significantly against the United States dollar, reflecting investor confidence in Canada's independent trajectory. Energy equities in the United States declined sharply, particularly companies exposed to Canadian supply chains. Utilities in the Midwest and Northeast experienced volatility amid uncertainty over electricity imports. The broader S&P 500 index fell as investors priced in sustained disruption of the largest bilateral trading relationship in the world. Markets are not ideological. They respond to probability. And the probability of near-term reconciliation fell sharply. Within hours, France, Germany, and the United Kingdom issued a joint statement expressing support for Canada's position and signaling readiness to deepen cooperation. This is strategically significant. If the dispute were purely bilateral, Washington might expect isolation to pressure Ottawa. Instead, major European powers signaled alignment with Canada's approach. In effect, the transatlantic balance began tilting. Canada's decision to proceed through the Alternative Security Partnership Fund carries long-term implications. If NATO mechanisms begin operating effectively without heavy United States leadership, it sets precedent. Other member states could pursue autonomous frameworks for regional defense and intelligence coordination. Continental security in North America has relied on integration for decades. A scaled-down or dissolved NORAD would require rapid restructuring of early warning systems, Arctic surveillance, and air defense protocols. Security planners understand that rebuilding trust is harder than building infrastructure. Energy is the most tangible economic lever in this dispute. Canada supplies a significant share of United States crude imports. Reorienting pipelines and infrastructure toward Pacific export terminals would represent not just temporary diversification, but structural redirection. Asian buyers reportedly offer premium pricing for stable supply contracts. If agreements are signed, capacity could gradually shift westward, reducing future American access even if political relations improve. Energy infrastructure is not easily reversed once reconfigured. Later that evening, President Trump met with congressional leaders from both parties. According to sources, lawmakers expressed concern that escalation without strategy risked long-term damage. Bipartisan majorities reportedly favor restoring stability in the relationship. Trump, however, remained firm, arguing that Canada ultimately needs the United States more than vice versa. The White House released a statement describing Canada's move as short-sighted and warning of consequences. The tone was defensive rather than strategic. Separately, the Department of Defense issued a more measured statement emphasizing commitment to North American security and expressing hope for restored cooperation. The contrast in tone did not go unnoticed internationally. Scenario 1. The frozen relationship diplomatic contact remains minimal. Trade continues at reduced levels due to private sector necessity, but official coordination remains strained. NORAD operates in diminished capacity. Intelligence sharing is selective. Border security tightens. Both economies experience drag, but Canada mitigates impact through diversification. The relationship remains frozen until political leadership changes. Scenario 2. Parallel North Americas. Canada formalizes independent security arrangements through NATO-backed mechanisms. Energy exports shift predominantly to Europe and Asia. Bilateral trade declines sharply. Defense partnerships with the United Kingdom, France, and Nordic states deepen. North America functions as two distinct strategic spheres. Scenario 3. The cascade effect. Other United States allies observe Canada's trajectory and consider similar diversification strategies. Mexico recalibrates trade dependency. European states accelerate autonomous defense development. Asian allies hedge security reliance. The United States remains powerful but less central. What to watch? In the coming weeks, 3 indicators will matter most. Whether Canada signs binding long-term energy contracts with non-United States buyers, whether NATO formally approves Canada's security funding and operationalizes independent frameworks, whether major American corporations publicly pressure Washington to restore relations. Each will signal whether this rupture is temporary or structural. When Carney ended that call, it was not theatrical, it was strategic. He signaled that Canada believes it can construct a more stable future through diversified partnerships than through a relationship defined by coercive negotiation. Whether that belief proves economically advantageous or politically sustainable remains to be seen. What is clear is that this was not a missed handshake. It was a pivot point. The United States-Canada partnership has been one of the most stable in modern history. Shared borders, integrated supply chains, joint defense, and deep cultural ties created resilience. Resilience, however, depends on trust. Trust, once fractured, does not automatically regenerate. As of 3:17 p.m., that trust entered its most uncertain phase in decades, and what replaces it will shape North America's political, economic, and strategic architecture for a generation.